Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lead Volunteers Podcast. My name is Josh Denhart. Grateful that you're here. Have kind of a fun episode today. We're glad that you've joined. And of course, as you know, Lead Volunteers is just one of the different collection of things under the Lead ministry kind of ecosystem. And so we're here to help you to, number one, get organized. Can you get organized? Please. Number two, we want to help you stop the revolving door of volunteers. And number three, if those two things happen, we are confident that you are going to experience lower or no burnout. So we're grateful for that. Well, we have a guest with us today. Her name is Esther Moreno. Miss Esther, grateful to see you today.
Hey, Josh. Super excited to be back on this
Yes.
incredible podcast.
Yes. Well, this is not your first time. You kind of have been on here a couple times. So grateful that you're here. Well, you have a new book that's coming out. And it actually came out already,
It
didn't it?
is. It's out. Super excited.
That's exciting. Well, the title kind of caught me. I wasn't sure how to take it. I wasn't sure. Like it said, children's ministry in crisis. I thought, okay, wow, where is she going with this? And as I started to dig a little bit deeper, I actually was very encouraged by the title. You're like, whoa, you're encouraged by crisis? Well, what I thought, Esther, I was wondering if your take on crisis was there's a crisis all around us. And that's not the angle that you took. The angle that you took
Not at
is
all.
there is a crisis and it's right here. It's myself. It's yourself. It's
Absolutely.
our leadership deficiencies that are the crisis. The other great thing about that I want to commend you is yes, there is a crisis, but the things that are out there, they're less easy for us to tackle and change. Those are things that are outside of our control. But what you're
Absolutely.
what you're bringing up is those leadership deficiencies within us. That's the crisis, and we have some control over that. So that part in and of itself was very, very, very encouraging for me. Well, here's the deal: we on the podcast, we kind of try to define a few things. We try to develop them, go a little bit deeper, and then, of course, land the plane. What in the world could I do tomorrow? So, the first thing, in terms of us defining it, help us to understand the position you came from this kind of underlying leadership deficiencies that exist in all of us.
Absolutely. Josh, I loved how you mentioned the title of the
Yes.
book because you're so right. Because there are some people who will read that, and be like, oh my goodness, when we think of a crisis, we're like, what's going to happen? Everything's going to shut down. And really, it really was a book that I wrote to encourage leaders
Right.
because, and I'll tell you, Josh, for me, I realized in my own leadership that I was having a spiritual crisis.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that. One of the chapters had to be, had to deal with being spiritually dead. And and,
Yes.
and I know that my titles and the topics sometimes can really come at you like, whoa, but it's really to open you up to those leadership deficiencies that may be right there that we don't know
Yes.
because we have these scales
Yeah.
in our
On our
leadership,
eyes. Yeah.
yeah, that grow on our eyes, and we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we can't see
Right.
that is happening that may be leading our departments, and not even our departments but our own lives
Right.
into crisis. And really, I just wanted people to really take a look at themselves as they're reading this book. I really wanted to challenge the leader to say, hey, man, this is a deficiency
In my
that
own
I
life.
have in my own life that I have. And I'm going to address this. I'm going to address this because I want to grow, because I want to be better, because God has entrusted this ministry to me. God has entrusted
Yeah.
my own family to
Yeah.
me. I talk about family and over relying on family in the book. God has entrusted these different ministries. I think quite often when we think of ministry, we think of the church, and we
Yep.
forget that we are the church, that our roles in the household as husband and wife and father and mother, these are all different ministries that God has called for us to steward, that we
Yes.
constantly have to assess, because if we are not careful, we won't be able to see how we may be driving a crisis
Yeah,
situation.
right. Um, like what does it say in Proverbs? Life goes. This is the JRV or the Josh Revised version, but life goes really bad, and you shake your fist at God, and it's like
Yeah,
you did this to yourself, buddy.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and so and the other thing too that I'm actually refreshed about your book is that everybody and their mother is so upset. They've got this bone to pick with society. They've got this bone to pick with where things are headed, and it's this, and it's like, dude, quit blaming everybody else for what in the world is going on. Why don't you make your bed, start with you. You know what I'm saying?
100%. And I think, Josh, I think that we struggle to do that. And you know that I come from a context of children's ministry leadership,
Sure.
and this book was really written for children's ministry leaders, but I really feel like it can help anybody
Right.
who opens the book, because we struggle so often, and I talk about this in the book. So often it's so easy to look at what we don't have, or look at what we think someone else is not doing for us.
That's right.
Senior leadership isn't doing this. My senior pastor isn't delivering on this. I'm not getting the support that I need, and this is why this is happening, instead of really looking
Blame
inside
game.
ourselves. Exactly. Instead of looking at ourselves and seeing, and it's such a, and I talk to leaders across the country, Josh, and
Yes.
I see this and it breaks my heart. How do you let a leader know who has reached out to you for help that the problem is you? And
Okay.
I know this
Now,
because the problem was me when I
yes.
was in leadership. And I am discovering these truths myself as I am writing this. I think when, you see people, they write these books, and you have multiple books out, and you were kind of deemed as an expert. And I'm like, mm-mm, I wrote this book and it has tons of my deficiencies. I am able to share with you because of my own
Sure, of
leadership
course.
deficiencies in my own life.
Well, the first big nugget is no leadership. And so talk to me about this. Are you saying like what's the crisis because it's us? Is it the crisis of us not having anybody over us leading that we're following? Is it that we have no leadership within ourselves? What's your take on this? Because like again, for the
Absolutely.
listeners, because I mean if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that I have, big bullet point number one is no leadership. So for those who are listeners, right? So talk to us about this no leadership. What does that mean?
I will absolutely. Josh, my first position, I was so spoiled as a children's pastor. 100% spoiled. I was in the space that had a very tight structure,
Mm-hmm.
to where it was an environment that only needed to be maintained.
Got it.
And I was okay with that, and I continue to maintain that environment. I was happy doing just that, and I was deemed as this excellent leader. She is maintaining things, everything's going great. But guess what? My second position, they didn't need a maintainer, they needed a leader. And
Yeah.
I had confused true leadership to be in this box of being a manager. I had learned to manage things, but when I went into an environment where the culture was completely different,
Yeah.
where they didn't need anybody to maintain anything, they needed true leadership, I floundered. And it was the craziest situation, and exactly what we're talking about. Instead of looking at myself and my own leadership deficiencies and doing everything that I could do to grow, I blame senior leadership. I blame these self-fulfilling prophecies that I created.
Right.
I created these. No one wants to help here. That's why people aren't helping. It had nothing to do with my lack of successfully recruiting and retaining volunteers, or the fact that I avoided authentic connections with people because I allowed myself to become a slave to the children's ministry area. Once again, another self fulfilling prophecy.
Right. Right.
And it would just in this chapter, I really dig into so many of my own deficiencies, which I love because I
Well,
think that transparency just helps people to grow.
it does. It does. And the funny thing is that I know that you're a shoe person. I know that you love shoes.
I am a shoe person.
Okay, so the first children's ministry role that you stepped into a set of shoes that were really nice shoes. They had good support.
Yep.
They laced up nice and well. They looked slick on the outside, and that was an easy gig to step into a well orchestrated thing already. And then you stepped into another pair of shoes, and you're like, "Son, these shoes they are messed up."
They are. These shoes are dirty. I
Yes.
don't like how they look. I've seen this and I've talked to leaders even recently, who share with me, man, I didn't have to go through this in my last position. And I'm like, honey, this ain't your last position.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
you need to make sure that you focus on learning the culture. And Josh, I've transitioned into another church. So
Hmm.
now I'm at a church plant. You cannot take the same mindset of an established ministry and take that into a church plant, a ministry that is literally growing from the ground up, that has just been planted. It is a whole another
Totally
way you
different
have to
ball game.
approach when it comes exactly when it comes to leading. And I've tried to walk alongside some of those leaders, but it's funny, and it's so many leaders across the country. I see them go into these situations, and instead of seeing themselves, so really, Josh, I will tell you, I mean, obviously I've written 5 books now
Hmm.
on my own deficiencies.
You should
But
be running out. You should be running out pretty quick of ideas.
I should be. I feel like as I am a mother of young children, and actually one who is going into her preteen years,
Oh,
I am
mercy.
continuing to run into my own deficiencies as a minister on the home front. So God is teaching me so much on how to minister to my own kids as
Yeah.
a children's ministry influencer. Esther, what are you doing in your own home?
Yeah.
But just these leadership deficiencies, and it really runs the gambit from, because I'm struggling in recruiting and retaining, I'm over depending on my own family. So
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have created a culture where the entire ministry is based off of me and my family. And really I'm struggling because I have spoken a message that I really don't need you. As long as I have my family, this ministry can run like a well-oiled machine. When I'm running my family
Into the
into the
ground.
ground,
Into the ground.
and Josh, because my husband is a VP in a Fortune 100 company
Yeah.
and also a co-children's pastor
Yeah.
on the weekends. So just facing that reality for me was hard. It's hard for us to look at our deficiencies
Yeah.
in leadership, but seeing little things like that, like, man, and the layers and the foundation that was crumbling underneath me, and I didn't even realize it, from the culture I was creating in my space and the chaos that I was creating in my own home without even realizing it, right? Because this is ministry. It's
Yeah.
all about Jesus.
Yeah.
We live to serve and to pour out of ourselves. That my foundation was crumbling, and God is like, Esther, it is not supposed to be like
Well, I
this.
tell people all the time, when I do ministry coaching or stuff, and I'm kind of like, hey, if your number one sub list is your very own family, we got a lot of work to do, because I never ever, and this is the truth, never ever in over a decade of serving at a large church as a children's pastor, I never had my wife step into a role that she wasn't scheduled for.
Yeah.
She never, because that's a boundary that I had, that I'm like, she's gonna, dude, listen, my wife is rolling into church with 4 small kids in tow. No, we're not playing this. Okay, so the next one on your list was no vision. So yes,
Yeah.
we have a low leadership deficiency, to where all of a sudden it's like, hey, you need to be able to lead in you need to be growing in such a way that, like, this church situation demands this of me, this church situation demands this of me, like, grow. But what about vision?
I think, Josh, when it comes to vision, I think this is a big one
Hmm.
that a lot of us struggle with, and not so much with coming with the vision. And obviously, in the book, I talk about vision, how to craft a vision, and not putting it on yourself to
Yeah,
come with the entire vision. I think sometimes when we're the leader, we feel like it has to come solely through us, but sometimes God wants to use others
guaranteed.
around you. Sometimes God wants us to create think tanks. And I get kind of bold. I'm going to be honest. In this chapter, kind of bold when it comes to those types of people that should be a part of your think tank. And they're not always, from a Christian community. If we are thinking about vision financially, maybe bringing someone in who is qualified financially to, when it comes to fundraising, maybe that's an issue. Bringing someone in who does fundraising for the city and bringing them a part of their think tank. But I really feel like, Josh, and chime in on this one. When it comes to vision, one thing that we really struggle with in leadership is passing that vision on, passing that baton on. Like we think we've done it, especially, and I'll speak from the perspective of children's ministry. We think we've done it. We think we passed this vision on, and nobody is really connected
So here's what I'll
to
say.
the.
Here's what I'll say to that. If you think you're leading and nobody is following, you're just taking a walk.
Mhm, mhm.
If nobody's following you, you're just taking a stroll all by your own lonesome. And so I totally get that. And I would say that, in terms of this think tank, I never led in isolation. I always sought to lead in community. And I like to talk and, I process verbally. My wife is completely different. Whenever she speaks, she has processed this thing and it's like a final draft. And dude,
Yeah.
when I speak, I'm like, I could edit it mid sentence. You know what I mean? I'm just thinking out loud. And so I gathered a team of people around me to do just that. And one of the people, this sounds crazy, but one of the people that I always sought to have on my team was a mom who was such a genius when it came to the city calendars. What I mean by that is this school district, this city thing that's going on, she knew everything. And I'm like, your kids don't even go to that school. How do you know about that particular school district's homecoming? And she goes, I just know those things. So I tried to pull in the most random of gift sets to listen, I don't have it all within me. And so to have vision
Yeah.
from other people to be able to, okay, I had one person say that he wanted sneezers. And I was like, bro, what's a sneezer? He said, I'm looking for sneezers. And I said, okay. And he goes, I want them to be contagious and then be sneezing all over people and spreading this vision. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting way to put it. But the idea, what you're saying is that it can't just come from you and you need to have it cascade
Yeah.
down for other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Now,
But Josh, look at this though. Let's say you craft that vision. Let's say you have crafted the perfect vision. You feel like it is inspired by God. Now you got to sell the vision.
right.
And we don't like talking about marketing and selling in ministry. But if you have a vision and you don't have the ability to sell that vision, and I would argue that knowing how to craft a vision and also knowing how to sell that vision to senior leadership is just as important. And I think so often, especially in children's ministry, the context I come from, we really struggle in selling that vision to senior leadership. Too often in children's ministry, and I'll be honest, I have been there, we sell too much of our need. Well, I
Oh,
need
girl.
this. This is what I'm lacking. I need to have this, that it takes away our credibility
Right.
to senior leadership. We're not selling our wins. All right. We're not sharing when with the staff meeting and we're going around and it's our turn. We're not sharing the amazing things that God is doing in the ministry. Let me tell you what happened. We are sharing, man, we're really struggling with this resource,
Yeah.
and this is something that we really need to look into. This takes away our credibility. So really in the vision chapter, we really break it down on, let's talk about some deficiencies in our leader. Everything begins and ends with our
Yes,
leadership.
it does.
Let's go back to that and let's talk about how to really craft a vision, but not just stop there. We're going to craft it. We are going to spread it, and
Yes.
make sure it catches on like wildfire. But then we are going to learn how to successfully sell it to senior leadership in a way that they take that on. So it
Well,
is it is
the
so many layers when it comes to vision.
so the interesting thing is the first one was no leadership of your very own. The second one was no vision. Those are very internal, but this next one
Mhm.
is outdated. Now this could be that it's your space, but it could be you. What are you thinking on this one?
Oh, absolutely. I think 100% it is both,
Okay?
Josh. I'm going to say I was a punk. Can I say punk on
You
your
can say
podcast?
punk. Yes.
I was a total punk. When I first went into ministry, if I went into a space that was outdated, it was what it was. I didn't fight for anything if I got shut down. And a lot of that was my deficiency in being a growing leader and
Sure.
being able to go to the table and really share the why behind why this needed to be updated, the statistics on where the next generation is going and how they see certain things that are outdated and how that connects with their heart and to their faith and to the God that we serve. I was not a growing leader. So I was not able to share this, but it really is important with the generation that we're dealing with when it comes to our spaces. But also, I love that you mentioned that, Josh. We can be outdated in our mindset. And I think this is why it's so important that we have strong leaders that are around us. And we hear this all the time, right? We always hear, the five closest people to you. You are going to reflect them. I'm telling you, Josh, it is so true. And I think that it's so important that we are cognizant of those voices that are around us that we allow to speak into us. Are they outdated
Right.
in their thinking? Because it is going to limit how you think and where
Yes.
you think things can go. And a lot of times the voices around us, they aren't those type of voices where they're like, yeah, digital technology is going here, you need to shoot for the moon. It's kind of like, okay, especially when the only voices we are hearing are those voices who are with us in these limited
And what
spaces.
that does is that creates this little internal echo chamber of all y'all thinking the same thing, and you're thinking that you're killing it, and maybe you're not.
You're killing it.
Okay, this next one is
Absolutely.
important. Burnout. This is a huge one. I think we all, I mean, that's one of the mainstays of what I'm doing nationally with people is seeking to prevent burnout.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. Absolutely, 100%. Burnout is, if you would ask me, Josh, I think it is one of the hugest issues
yeah,
in ministry. One, for the leader who has been entrusted a entire ministry department, it's burning out ourselves, obviously. And
yes,
obviously in this book, I really discuss, ways to avoid burnout in yourself because you matter. It starts with the leader. If the leader is totally burnt out, it is going to affect your department. Don't think that you are fooling anyone. If you are burnt out,
right.
it is going to show. It is going to reflect in how you treat others. It is going to reflect even at home how you show up with your family and at home, but
It's
also
true.
it's going to reflect how you may burn out those around you.
For sure, because if you're burned out and the show has to go on, and you're handing an excess of stuff because you're dogging it out, you're going to hand it off to somebody, and that's going to be hard on them. And it's a spiral. It spirals downward. It just really is one domino hits the other. But burnout is real. Burnout is real. And some of it comes from, you know, like seeking to run a hill and
Yeah.
cast a vision and getting continually shut down. Some of it can be just overwork. Some of it can be the
Hmm.
next one that you talk about is like being spiritually dead. And that can
Yeah.
lead to our own sense of burnout. So talk about this spiritually dead one.
Josh, I will be honest with you. This one scares people when they read it because it's such a strong statement. But I call it spiritually dead because I found myself in ministry, going through the
Yep.
motions, but being spiritually dead myself. So I want to preface, this is why I named this chapter. It's so easy to be going through the motions of ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have felt it. You're not experiencing joy.
Mm-hmm.
You're not experiencing fulfillment. For me in children's ministry, I'm waiting for the wait. Why ain't the pastor done? Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
we need
yeah.
to pick up these kids.
Right.
It's really because we are spiritually dead on the inside, and I've shared this before. It was a conversation. I was able to have coffee, and I was in Nashville, and I was able to sit down with Jim Weidman. And I remember, I'm like, man, I am with like the godfather of children's ministry. Let me talk to him about all of the things that he's learned in children's ministry. Let me just sit here and be like this cup and allow him to pour all this wisdom
Right.
down on me. And the one thing he kept saying, which just took me aback, how are you doing with your relationship with the Holy Spirit? He
Hmm.
just kept going back to that. I'm like, dude, I want to talk about children's ministry. Make me great. And he's like, no, how are you doing when it comes to you and your relationship with the Holy Spirit? And I had never thought about that before. And that had really led me to a place where I realized, man, really bad. I am just spiritually dry here. It was making me cranky at home. It
Sure.
was making me cranky with my colleagues that I would deal with the weekly I know your plate is jam packed, the weekly to dos. I would be cranky. I would be very judgy and standoffish. And it was because I was not protecting that part of me in leadership, especially in ministry. I would say it's easier in ministry to fall off,
It is.
you know.
And here's
Mhm.
why I think that that's true, because the work that we're doing is
Mhm.
spiritual in nature. And so we can actually anesthetize our very own selves and be like, yeah, like me setting this up is closeness to God. No,
Mhm.
it's not. Me
Not at
me
all.
like running a ministry meeting, that's just no, you can dupe yourself into thinking that since the
Yeah.
work itself is spiritual, that you yourself are doing spiritual things. No,
Yeah.
you can do your job without being spiritually engaged at all. I've
And Josh,
totally seen
I
it.
think it's okay for leaders to know, and I think this is why it's so important for us to be transparent
Hmm.
as leaders and as influencers to say we struggle too. It is a daily temptation
Hmm.
be a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ to push Jesus Christ out of my day. But we can't afford to do that. When we operate disconnected from the source,
Hmm.
we create these environments that are spiritually dead. And I don't care what your strategy is, what the bells, what the whistles are, if God is not in it,
Hmm.
if his presence is not invited into what you are doing, you are going to produce, whether it's a spiritually dead environment, a spiritually dead department, a spiritually dead program. You will produce that when we are not
Vibrant
ferocious.
our own selves, vibrant our own
Yeah,
selves. And the funny thing is,
100%.
before we move on to the last point, what I want to say is very interesting that when I didn't work at a church, I found myself like I absolutely needed the Lord and I
Yeah.
needed time in the Word, I needed time praying. And so I went into a battlefield that was
Hmm.
not godly. And therefore, I was super hungry to get
Hmm.
strong spiritually before I went into that devoid of God environment. And
It is 100%. Hmm.
okay, that's great. But when I came into the church, like sloughing off and not having time in the Word, I kind of was just in this general spiritual environment. So it was a lot easier to blow that off when I wasn't faced with the challenges that maybe a secular job would face. Okay, the last one. Take us home, Esther. Hope for the future. Talk to us.
Oh man. So I really wrote this chapter for all of those who were really scared by the title.
Of
Okay,
crisis. Of
so yes,
crisis.
yes, I'm crisis. So, oh man, you have discovered all of these deficiencies in you. And I think when we really assess who we are and we realize, man, I've had these scales on my eyes, man, I have all these deficiencies. This is what the enemy does. He comes in and tries to convince us, yep, you're a hot mess and there's nothing you can do about it. And you will never be a good leader. That is such a lie. Just
Right.
because you are at a certain, level in your leadership today, I am telling you, that does not mean you cannot grow and be a dynamic leader tomorrow. You can. And this is really why I wrote this chapter, because I'm a firm believer that phenomenal leaders aren't born, they're made.
For
When you
sure.
invest in growing and building yourself, it will happen. So it really was just a chapter to inspire leaders to go forth, to
Yes.
know that you are not in a position by accident, that where you are is exactly where God wants you to be, because that space, that space needs you. And so often we're so busy playing the comparison game. And I know it's easy. You might read these chapters and say, I suck as a leader. I didn't even realize. I've had people already contact me, Esther, I've already read chapter 1 and my toes are sore. And it's
Yes.
easy, and the enemy loves that. It's easy. He's like, oh yeah, let me come in and make it worse, and let me make sure they look on social media at this post of this mega church
Right.
and this leader who seems like they have it all together. Not so. I'm going to tell you right now, the grass is always greener on the other side, but you have no idea what's going on in that yard across the street
That's right.
where you think the grass is so green. Focus on you. Focus on being the phenomenal leader that God has created you to be, and move forward in what you do in ministry.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, in terms of hope, is Jesus Christ will build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail. That's let's just take heart in that as well. Well, listen, Esther, this has been fantastic. I'm grateful. What a good interview. I'm grateful for you being my friend. I'm grateful for you being here with us today. And the book is out. And where would be the best location for them to pick up a book
The
such as
book
this?
is out. You can get it everywhere. Obviously, it's out on Amazon. You can order it Barnes and Nobles. Also, you can get a signed copy if you get it from my website, www.childheart83.com, and I will sign a personal message just for you. But my real goal is to just get it in as many
Sure.
leaders' hands as possible.
That is awesome. Well, Esther, thank you very much. Always fun to talk with you. Well, gang, this has been just yet one more episode of the Lead Volunteers podcast. We're grateful that you're here. Hey, listen, be encouraged. You can actually grow as a leader. God has given you those capacities. So grateful for you. Keep up the good work, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.